Welcome to Ty's Daily Market Update. I'm Ty Wong reporting from New York, and it is Tuesday, July 14th. Important, busy day today, so we'll get right to it. And as always, we need to start with what President Trump has said. So this came out yesterday, and this is from Syed Arachi. I believe he's the foreign minister of Iran. And he said, POTUS, which is President of the United States, is absolutely right. Whoever provides secure and safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz should be compensated for this service. Iran has been the guardian of the Strait and will remain so forever. It sounds like Trump. 20% is, of course, too much. We will be fair. Now, the positive part is a little humor out of Iran. And humor is good. When you can bring humor into a proceeding, that means in some ways you don't take each other absolutely seriously. Unfortunately, I don't think Foreign Minister Arachi is the person calling the shots in Iran. Now, earlier this morning, President Trump posted on Truth Social that he's backing off the 20%. And it does sound like too much of a protection racket, which it should not be. He goes, based on a highly productive conversations with Middle East leadership, I've decided to replace the 20% U.S. reimbursement fee with trade and investment deals that various Gulf states will be making in the U.S. Those investments will be massive, but at the same time, extraordinarily good for them in their future. So basically, the Gulf countries have already agreed to invest a lot in the U.S. They probably made some more promises and said to the president, you really can't charge a fee because you're playing in the hands of the Iranians, because that's exactly what they wanted to do. So yes, there will be no fee. I think Trump came out with that. It surprised everybody, and people have gotten him to walk it back. The most important story of the day really was the inflation reports, the June CPI report. So headline inflation was down 0.4% versus 0.1%. While that's great, that's all gasoline. And you can see that we always talk about gasoline every day. That's just all gasoline. Gasoline, fell from the beginning of May, $4.60, almost $4.60 a gallon, down to under $4. But more important is the core inflation. That's out without food and energy, what the Fed looks at. Market was looking at 0.2%. It came out flat. And this is really important because Fed Governor Waller, who has been a dove, who wanted rate cuts as recently as probably 6 months ago, said, you know what, if the core inflation comes in hot again tomorrow, he said this yesterday, we're going to have to think about raising interest rates. And I think, people took that seriously because it was Waller. Now, core flat, the last time the core was flat happened in January 2021. So now, oil prices are up, gasoline prices are ticking up a bit. So we're not going to get a repeat of this in July, but this does give the Fed some time, easily until August, September, before they really have to think about anything very seriously. So let's take a look at what happened. This is 8:30 when the number came out. The green line is the U.S. 2-year yield, and you look at it collapsed. It collapsed from 4.26 all the way down to I think like almost 4.10 before it started to creep up. Now, when Warsh made a couple comments, and that's why I think we saw this creep up. You can see that gold jumped to over 2%, and it jumped over 2% here, this candle, and it's come back down a bit. Bitcoin jumped and has held it. So generally, good news, and you can see it happened immediately. So Wall Street Journal, we just talked about this. Oil prices have rebounded since a collapse in the ceasefire. So July won't bring as much good news in June as well. Price drops in 3 categories. Car insurance, wireless data services, and hotels will pull down the monthly rate, but they're not going to be repeated in the months ahead. So the one thing that got a lot more expensive is computer software and accessories increased more than 17%. On the year, the largest gain on record. And certainly, actually, not just software. If you're buying hardware, buying a good laptop now is $1,000. It used to be, $500 or $600. So this is really good news for the markets as well as for the Fed. And remember I said yesterday there was a 41% chance of a rate hike in July, and out they were smoking crack. It was 89% of a chance of a hike by December, very overpriced. Well, today, after that inflation report, the likelihood of a July hike drops from 41 to 16%. It is still overpriced. There is no way they're moving in July, in 2 weeks' time. And then in September, the chances of a Fed hike dropped by 14%. So you can see this is the probability the Fed doesn't hike. It's much higher today than it was yesterday. I'm still slightly concerned about Waller's comments, but like I said, the CPI buys us until at least September before the Fed has to seriously think about something. So let's go to the banks. The Wall Street Journal, and I've summarized this because otherwise it will take the whole show to talk about it. The big banks came out with record-smashing earnings this morning, reassuring a signal on the health of consumers and corporate America. Bright spot across the board. JP Morgan, the biggest bank, Chief Jamie Dimon said it's getting close to as good as it gets. We just don't know how long it's going to last. So I summarized it here. For the commercial bank, and obviously Goldman is not a commercial bank, net interest incomes, that's the money that they make after paying out depositors, etc. JP Morgan up 10%, 4% if you take out the markets. B of A 9%, Wells 5%, Citi 13%. Now, provisions, these are provisions for loan losses, and it's important because if you're worried about the health of your loans, you have to set aside more provision. You could play with it, but look, JP Morgan, flat quarter on quarter, down 12% year on year. Bank of America up small quarter on quarter, down year on year. Wells down, Citi down. So basically they have to set aside less money for loans that they're worried about. A great sign. Now, charge-offs, that means loans that they've basically given up on. Charge-offs are unchanged at JP Morgan with loans up 10%. Charge-offs are lower in B of A and Wells while loans grow. And then Citi released some reserves back into income even with loans higher. So this is really good news for the economy. A lot of people look at the banks and saying, if these numbers, if they have to put more money up for provisions for bad loans, and there are, more bad loans that, have been confirmed, that's not good for the economy. So all these things are really good, shows resilience, at least, through the second quarter. So we talked about earlier, a few weeks earlier, how I think the Strait of Hormuz is going to be less important going forward than it is now because the countries around there are saying, you know what, we don't want to be hostage to the Iranians, whom, basically we all don't like. So, and the truth is, Axios reporting that countries and companies are scrambling to bypass the waterway. Bloomberg Intelligence reports that the 2026 U.S.-Iran war and disruption may ultimately be remembered less for triggering an immediate oil crisis than accelerating global efforts to reduce dependence on the world's most important energy choke point. Goldman analysts have looked at 7 pipeline projects, and they're basically saying by the end of next year, the capacity plus existing pipelines could basically insulate 45% of the pre-war Persian Gulf producer exports from potential future Hormuz shocks. By the end of 2028, that number rises to more than 60%. So in your mind, half the oil that's coming through will now come through other ways unless the Iranians try to attack pipelines. Construction for these pipelines is expected to be relatively quick, shockingly so for those used to the U.S. pace of infrastructure development, which basically, because of the environmentalists and of the labor unions, essentially nothing ever happens. We really can't build infrastructure in this country. The only reason we're getting data centers is it's all private. And by the way, they said, whenever there's supply disruption, things move faster. The countries who can't bypass are Qatar, Kuwait, and Iraq. They're going to be more heavily dependent. So you can just look. These are already under construction, and these are planned or proposed. You can see this one just bypassing that one. We'll just take it from here to here. Saudis are putting one another one that goes to the Red Sea. So it's eventually only 10% going to go through. Still an impact, but not that big. Okay, Brent oil up today, but this candle is, still up, but off the high, suggesting a little bit of a pause in the rally. Gasoline heating oil still rallying, but, decelerating a little bit in how fast they're moving up. Gasoline prices, interestingly, drops another penny. So it's 2 straight drops. We'll see how long this continues. I can't see it continuing to drop until we get, some kind of resolution in Iran, but don't know when that will come. So let's look at Korea. The Kospi on a daily might be ready for a bounce. And here's the magnification of this here. When you get this kind of candle, a lower low finishes higher in the upper half, it suggests that this impulsive move maybe has run its course, or certainly is fatigued. We could get another bounce, or at least a little sideways price action. Apparently, I've seen reports from B of A that said Korean retails were sellers yesterday, and that might be the capitulation or the surrender that the market needs for a bounce. So S&P 500, we had a lot of good news today. It's up a little bit, 0.3%. You'd like to see a strong finish when you have good news from banks, low inflation report. If this closes lower, then you actually would have to think up a little bit. Overall sideways, technology leading, energy is flat, and healthcare is down. So S&P up 0.4%. Look at SK. SK up 21%, up $32 on the day. So that suggests that I think we may get a good start in Korea. Metals remain higher. The dollars are lower. Now bonds were up more than this, but they're still up. I think they'll hold this into the close. And I wonder we'll get some profit taking. We'll be flat on oil. Crypto is up nicely. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again tomorrow.